Hashtag psychotherapy unfogged with Mark Fielding.
Hello, welcome to episode 4, season 5 of Hashtag Psychotherapy Unfold. As you know, I'm Mark Fielding, psychotherapist and relationship counsellor, and your host. As our listeners will know, this is our first episode of 2024, and we are continuing the theme of season 5 with relationships. Season 5 has been, a great season so far. We're only at the start, and it's certainly going to continue. I think today I have the absolute pleasure to welcome Gurpreet Singh, a counsellor and psychotherapist. Gurpreet works in private practice. He also runs training workshops in stress management, business communications, and cross-cultural communications. Helping people help themselves is a real passion for him, be it through a training environment, in workshops, working with people individually, as a couple, or in groups. He has had a successful career in IT consultancy. Through life changes, he found himself drawn to self-development courses. He pursued these with a desire for self-discovery and qualified in therapeutic counselling as a part of this process. His current career embraces working as a counsellor, psychotherapist, trainer, and also working fairly extensively, actually, in the media. Gurpreet's specialities include stress management, addiction, anger management, anxiety, couple issues, marriage counselling, relationship issues, self-esteem, and many others. So thank you so much for coming on the show, Gurpreet. Nice to see you again.
Good to see you too, Mark. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm really glad to have you here. I always kick off the show by asking our guests to say a little bit about the personal experiences that led them into the field. Perhaps we could start there.
I think you said it all already, really. I mean, I had a good career, and I wasn't really looking for anything there was no plan to become a counselor or to do any of this training, but through self changes, desire to know more about myself, kept digging and just ended up being a counselor one day and thought, what should we do with this now? And I opened up a practice, and lo and behold, it has brought together a lot of my interests that I've been pursuing for many years, not realizing that this is where it would converge.
Mm. Yeah, and it is it is the kind of career where I guess, I think most of us, I think it's true that we love learning, and it's the kind of career where learning is just endless, isn't it really? The chances for development, which I really love about, the counselling and psychotherapy kind of area. So we're going to talk about arguments today. I mean, this may be a bit of an obvious place to start, but what are arguments? I mean, how do arguments tend to play out between people?
Arguments is, if you go for a textbook definition of arguments, I think arguments are literally about differing opinions, expression, whatever the basis of the opinion is, political, cultural, social, whatever sometimes the reason for the argument is not relevant. It could be as simple as a dishwasher, or it could be something more complicated like political views. And for example, general elections are coming up, and that might be triggering for many people. So the reason is not relevant, but a differing opinion or differing views and an intense desire to hold on to your own generally result in, if at the shallow end, expression of differing opinions, at the deeper end, arguments and name calling and other things. So riots, for example, or just shouting matches at family dinners. I'm giving you extreme examples here, but it can happen. So arguments, but there's an essential component of arguments which takes it away from slight disagreement, which is anger. The necessary component of arguments is anger, because if you take the anger out, then people are just expressing views, right? And that's all healthy. Nothing wrong with that. But when you become angry, anger is a necessary component of arguments in that way.
I mean, how do arguments, just to kind of just look at one particular domain, in terms of anger and in terms of angry arguments, And this is always going to be, dependent on, the individual people within a couple. But how do these kind of disagreements play out in couple dynamics? Because I guess as a couples therapist, you must see a lot of this.
Yeah, it's how it works out is like I said, I mean, one of the things that people tend to argue about in couples, and I don't know because you work with couples as well, so I don't know if you come across that, but certainly in my work, dishwasher seems to be a point of contention.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah,
It comes up more often than you'd think.
yeah.
People talk about how to load the dishwasher as an example of where people can't agree. So dishwasher of all things in the house is the place where it's not about where to put your shoes and if somebody's cleaned or not. It's the dishwasher for some reason. That comes up repeatedly. Other things come up too. I mean, all those other things that I said earlier also come up. So I think I lost your question. Your question was, what do people tend to disagree about in couples? I think your question was.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. I can't help myself but laugh, but this is very, very common, isn't it? People have different ideas around how a dishwasher should be used, and it can cause conflict. But I guess how do couples, I mean, in a couple where conflict and arguments are not dealt with well, I mean, this again is quite difficult for you to answer because it's very dependent on the couple, but how can these arguments tend to escalate, kind of bringing in the idea of anger and
So how do arguments escalate? I think you said it yourself. It's like if arguments are dealt with, appropriately, meaning you can express anger, and with an argument, you don't throw in the towel, or you don't think the person is bad, or the whole relationship doesn't go to pot just because you had an argument. Now, that's all healthy. In fact, I would say a healthier couple is one that argues, but then also knows how to resolve an argument, which is a really important part. Do they know how to resolve an argument?
yeah,
It's not the presence of an argument, it's the ability to resolve it that is often the success determinant of a relationship.
yeah,
Can somebody have an argument and not think everything has gone to pot because we had an argument about dishwashers? I don't know, but if the dishwasher is more symbolic of a power difference and one person feels more aggrieved with the other because they tend to, let's say, one person is always insistent on filling the dishwasher in a certain way. Now, if that is representative of a larger problem, which means they always insist on getting their own way in a relationship, then you can see how this will play out. That actually the dishwasher is not the reason why somebody's arguing. At the surface level, the dishwasher simply represents two different ways of doing something. At the deeper end, it might be symbolic of a power difference and unhappiness of one person with the other over the power they hold.
Yeah, so I guess it can be underpinned by other couple dynamics, power dynamics within couples, I guess something you didn't say, but unspoken kind of resentments. And so I guess the argument can be centered, symbolically around the washing machine or the dishwasher, but however, there may be other issues, underpinning it. I mean, I just wanted to ask, and again, it depends on the couple, but how do you deal? I mean, how do you work with couples in the room because obviously couples will have conflict when they're in couples dynamics and arguments will break out. I just wonder how you deal with that, how you work with that with a couple when you're all sitting in the room.
I love it. This might sound really odd. I actually love it when they have an argument in my presence.
Yeah.
Because then I don't have to guess what is happening between them. It's right in front of me. And all the dynamic can come forth if the couple have an argument in front of you. It doesn't, I mean, that doesn't mean to say I invite them to have an argument in front of me, but organically, naturally, as the conversation progresses, if they end up having an argument in front of me, I can hold it, meaning I can hold the space. So for me, if they have an argument in front of me, I can see what their exchange is. And in that exchange is visible sometimes the power difference, the resentments, the love. You can see it all in an argument, just in the way they argue, because it's all the unspoken stuff. It's all the body language. It's it's all unconscious communication that we're after, and that is far more visible in an argument. So when it happens in front of me, it's great. Even if they communicate, how far they sit away from each other, whether they're leaning into each other or away from each other. So all that represents, what is going on between the couple. You know,
Yeah,
guesswork out, right?
yeah, yeah. I mean, I completely agree with you. I mean, I guess from from a kind of couples counselor perspective, yeah, I guess when a couple get into conflict in the room, I mean, it's so much data, isn't it? I guess we can see so much. Um, yeah, I mean, although sometimes I think with I mean, I'm choosing my words carefully here, but sometimes with some couples that I think are very used to conflict, yeah, I mean, sometimes it can escalate quite a lot in the room, can't it? And I think it's important for us to know how to kind of calm it down. I don't know whether that's your experience with some couples that are high conflict can really escalate, can't it? I think.
Where you have to stop it before it gets there, because
Yeah.
you can see it coming. I mean, I've rarely been caught out by a couple
Mm.
where I haven't seen the next step coming. But you can normally see it. I mean, you can see it in any argument, even if you were to observe it
Yeah.
on the street, you can see the escalation.
Yeah.
So as a counselor, it's your job to kind of, or certainly it's my job in my sessions to maintain the level of the session so it never becomes uncontainable.
Yeah.
Because I also have to work with what is containable for me,
Yeah.
right? And if there's a threat, then it has to be managed before it gets there.
Yeah.
And if there is an extreme threat, then you have to take appropriate measures.
Yeah. 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 I mean, absolutely. I'm just moving around a little bit. I mean, I'm just referencing your article on our arguments, and you talk in that article about values and how these play into arguments. I wonder, Gurpreet, could you say a little bit more about that? How values kind of play in this area?
Values are probably one of the fundamental couple, fundamental ideas what brings couples together, right? So similar values is a really important thing,
Mm.
couples to come together, right?
Yeah.
Sharing the same value, let's say about money, sharing the same value about children, sharing sharing the same view about, let's say, I don't know, religion, faith, or something else about family values. When people have the same values, things tend to go smoother because they're aiming for the same thing.
Yeah.
But when they fall out over values, and this comes up in a lot of multicultural relationships,
Mm.
where people are from different backgrounds or from different cultures,
Mm.
that you can end up with no fault of their own, they can end up in a lot of conflict around values that they don't understand about the other person.
Mm.
So they end up arguing about what is right and what is wrong, but really at the heart of it is some cultural territory that has not been appropriately navigated or even understood. They're not, even though they've been living in the culture that they've been living in, they haven't quite understood what it means to enter into a relationship where the other person is from a different culture.
Mm. Yeah.
Something as simple as time, can drive
Yeah.
people mad. In some cultures, time is loose and flexible.
Mm.
In other cultures, time is very tight, meaning it's very precision oriented.
Yeah.
So if somebody says it's 10:06, it's 10:06.
Mm.
It's not, hey, when we wake up and if it's 10 o'clock, we'll meet up. That's not, and some cultures do operate like that.
Yeah. True.
And you get the people from these two different cultures in a meeting. Forget couples. If you get them in a meeting, how do you think they're going to operate? And if you get them in a couple, how do you think they're going to operate around time? And somebody says, okay, we'll go to dinner at 7 p.m. What do you think it means to both of them? Now, is it their fault? Or is it that they don't know that the cultural factors are playing a role here? And have they understood how to work with the other person who has a different concept of time to their own?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, that is really interesting. And it touches on what was going to be my next question. How do you work with a couple where there are different kind of cultures, they come from different cultures and there are cultural differences that are causing conflict? And again, difficult for you to answer because it very much depends on the couple, but generally, how would you work with those kind of things, like time, for instance, and different values culturally around time? How do you work with that as a counsellor?
Uh, Luckily, because I've kind of done a lot of research in this area, and I've got a personal interest, and I've run some communication training in this as well. That actually I've come to understand this in great detail. So knowing this, so when you first give them the shared information of why they're arguing over time, and there are terminologies for this, right? So one is polychronic time and one is monochronic time, and these terminologies matter. Because polychronic, as you would imagine, is a little bit more flexible, and monochronic is is very precise.
Yeah.
So, so just introducing these ideas to them as information, let alone trying to understand it in deeper. I mean, I met a couple once, they were still arguing over the time that they turned up for the wedding. And for one person, it was flexible. So they just kind of went with the flow and decided when everyone was together, turned up for the wedding. The other person was like, everybody's waiting, and where are you? Do you know what I mean? So for some people, and you can see how this argument, and they both ended up arguing over why, why the other person didn't respect their. So the monochronic client person is saying, why weren't you there? And, you insulted my guests. And the other person is saying, yeah, well, I have to get all my guests together before I could turn up. So, you can see how this works, right? And this argument has no end. So when I first introduced both of those, I was like, and this is the position most often that couples take, that they believe they're right. And in order for them to be right, the other person has to be wrong.
Yeah, so true.
And who wants to be wrong?
Yeah.
So the argument is endless. So once I introduced the concept to them and they woke up to the idea, and then it became a lot easier to talk about. So now we were trying to understand the problem and work out a way that both of them could look at each other and not feel the resentment around that, than constantly go, but you insulted my guests, but I have to take care of my guests, and that kind of.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess then, being given more information really and understanding, I guess, helps them to zoom out and look at the conflict a little bit differently. I mean, it's so true what you say about, right and wrong as well. I mean, nothing good in a couple dynamic comes from that kind of thinking, does it? Someone has to be right, somebody has to be wrong. But it's so often part of a couple dynamic around these kind of things, so common, and it also kind of, bleeds into power dynamic and, kind of other areas. Could I just ask you, in terms of, I mean, you work with many, many people, you're really experienced. In terms of arguments between maybe different kind of age groups, I'm thinking maybe millennials, Gen Z. Do you notice any difference in terms of what those groups would argue about, how they manage arguments, or is it pretty much the same as other age groups? I mean, what do you see?
If you take the building blocks of relationships, they haven't changed.
Yeah.
That it's based on values, that hasn't changed throughout the generations. Yes, it has changed from, let's say, 100 years ago, or maybe more than that, when marriages were a part of a political thing, right? And it was not completely romantic engagements. They were political engagements, and sometimes done to gain power, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Political power. But if you take that element out of it, right, and if you move to the generations that we know, baby boomers and Gen X is the way we're looking at it. If you go into that category, I don't think the building blocks of relationships have changed. Meaning values are still the same. How people, money is still around. We're not a cash economy anymore. We're like much more e-transactions, that sort of thing. So things have changed. Terminologies have changed. I mean, in the 70s, nobody used the term ghosting. It's a much more modern concept. So firelighting or gaslighting, that's not, again, new terminologies. So you've got new terminologies to understand something that is happening. Attachment theories were not as well known. So, so now those things are coming through. People are more able to read on things, understand things. They've got new terminologies. Means of communication have changed. We used to write letters and be on phone. And now what has happened is that it's texting. People have arguments over text. So the means of communication have changed, plus the attention span. So, with the advent of internet technologies, obviously people's attention span have dithered. And that has an impact on people's communication. So people, when they send a text, their patience to wait for a text is not there. Whereas, they say, well, I sent that person a text and I waited like 2 hours and there's no response. I mean, back in the day, people used to mail letters and that took 3 days to get there and then 3 days to get a response. Do you know what I mean?
Or longer.
Or longer. So if they wrote immediately, of course. But, so that time isn't there. That time has shrunk. Attention span has shrunk. And therefore, we're like looking for responses much quicker. So we live in this era, and I think it's more the era than the generation influenced by the technologies that we're using to communicate much more than, I would say, the basis of what builds relationships. And people also, we're living in an instant gratification culture.
Yeah.
So, and like, I mean, can you speed up the maturing of wine? Can you speed up the maturing of relationships? Not sure about that. So it's going to take time. I mean, people want like an instant answer. Like I said this today, so why hasn't it already been changed? Yeah, somebody has to, so people's emotional time, and that's another way to look at time. People's emotional time is different to physical time, and that's a different way to look at time, right? So when the emotional time is stretched out, then you need to give them that. You can't just speed it up just because, we live in an instant gratification culture. I don't know if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that made complete sense. I mean, that's really, really interesting, and it's also true. I mean, attention span is less. Communication is really different, isn't it? I mean, I guess back in kind of our youth, it was telephone really, and it wasn't it. But now the means of communication are so many. MSN, social media, etc. And it's so interesting to hear you talk about attachment theory. We don't have to go into this in any too great a detail, but I don't know whether you find the same. I mean, with the kind of younger generations, I find generally there's a lot more understanding, I think, of attachment theory. And I don't know whether you agree with this. For me, I think in terms of couples disagreeing and someone's got to be right, someone's got to be wrong, I think, pre-knowledge of attachment theory, I think that could really happen with different attachment types. Couples are much more likely to drop into feeling that someone that maybe had a preoccupied attachment, pattern was wrong or an avoidant. But I don't know whether you find that with millennials and Gen Z, the fact they understand attachment theory and have a better understanding, I would say generally, of psychology, that perhaps helps a little bit, or maybe I don't know. How do you find that? Would you agree, disagree? Depends on the people, of course, but
that's it. It's the tail end. What you said at the right at the end. It depends on the person.
It does.
I've also seen instances where this information is weaponized, which means it's used against the other person.
That's true.
Because you are of anxious attachment, therefore you are doing this. So it's weaponized.
Yeah.
And when you weaponize information, it's counterproductive to the direction of the relationship.
Yeah, that's true.
So where you want to go with this ought to be, I mean, if you use it to understand it and perhaps walk around it and explore it with your partner, great. All that is good stuff. Nothing wrong in sharing information, exploring it, opening it, and saying, hey, this is what I read. What do you think of this? And then finding a way to work together with it. But instead, if you start weaponizing it, like I said earlier, and you start kind of holding it against the other person, saying, you do this because X, Y, and Z, and because your mother didn't do this or your father didn't do this, that's why I have to put up with this. That's weaponized information.
Yeah.
And that is counterproductive. That's not helpful at all, I don't think, in relationships. That's power exertion.
Yeah, I mean, I really hear that. Yeah, and pathologizing the other person, really. I mean, and that does also happen. I mean, it's so true. Couples with that knowledge can do different things with it. They can look at it. They can try and improve the relationship with the understanding, or they can use it to as a weapon. I mean, that is so true.
Or become each other's therapist, right?
Yeah.
You can also have that happen. They end up becoming a therapist for the other person.
Yes.
It's like, this is what you should do. And it's like, hang on a minute. Like, sometimes you have to name it. You have to say, so are you being a therapist for the other person? Or are we trying to understand this? You have to name it.
Yeah, and feeding into that kind of power dynamic, I mean, this is, I think, this is why I really enjoy working with couples. It's very, very complex. I mean, every couple is completely different, obviously. I mean, couples dynamics are very, very complex. I wanted to maybe just move around a little bit more and just ask you, in recent years, what would you say have been the most kind of divisive, argument-causing issues, maybe, society-wise, that have kind of filtered down into friends arguing, couples arguing?
It's really interesting that take Brexit, for example, right? So Brexit was a point of contention between a lot of people. Now, what I didn't get many couples with Brexit disagreements. But I got like the couples between, which probably indicates some kind of joint view on Brexit. So one voted one way, the other probably voted the same way.
Yeah.
Because what you did get was arguments over family dinners. Right?
Yeah.
When the larger family is involved and different generations on the same table, that's when you had arguments.
Mm.
So it felt like generations didn't agree, but within the couple, that wasn't a problem.
Yeah.
So that is, but so you asked me about arguments. I don't think that I can rate that as a couple argument.
Mm.
But, couple arguments tend to happen over, so when you can't leave, because it's very expensive to get housing now. And couples who were together with a family can't afford to sometimes move out.
Mm.
So they end up staying together for different reasons.
Yeah, so true. Yeah.
So that's what that can be one of the reasons, financial reasons, inability to leave that can add to the resentment and that can come out of the other person unless they work out a way to work with each other.
Mm. Yeah.
Right. So unless they've got some means of calming things down between each other and coming to some kind of a civil agreement to say this is how we'll function while we live in the same house, it is an explosive territory. So that is another reason. So again, now, with all this, about the war in the Middle East going on, and in Ukraine and Russia. So there are these wars going on. Again, you can have a point of conflict here, but generally, if you find a couple that have joint value systems, there are, what we call vertical stresses, right? So the vertical stresses are when you come across a event, like, for example, having a first child. Right? That's a vertical stressor. Right? There is a horizontal stress, for example, stress about a job, that is an ongoing thing that is never going to go away. But a vertical stressor is an event that comes and then is around for a few years. So vertical stressors often, whether politically, let's say if the economy takes a downturn, then that puts financial stress on the couple that will then bring about, disagreements. So I don't think there is any particular events that have, done couple arguments, but there are definitely, let's say, life changes or, things like that will create stress on the couple. Any stressful event in the couple, then they'll either come together or they'll begin to show cracks in other parts of their relationship. So stressors sometimes act as a gateway to problems that haven't been addressed in the relationship and been left to bury. That then opens up a whole bunch of things.
Yeah, and I really resonate with that. I mean, it can go either way, really, can't it? I mean, something like, having their first child. I mean, obviously that is, a real life-changing experience, and it can bring the stress of it, if you like, can bring couples together, can make them more connected, but it can also, open up kind of, I don't know, unseen kind of ruptures in the relationship and things like parenting styles. I mean, did you find couples maybe would argue about parenting styles? Because I guess,
But by the second child, that tends to get sorted out. But by the first child, that's part of the arguments, isn't it? Parenting styles. How to discipline a child, what nursery to send the child to, what the child should wear, something as simple as that. So there are all sorts of stresses related to that. And let's say if one person is very heavy on what the child should wear, then that can again create a power difference conflict. So that's just one example, by no means the only one, of course, but that's just one example of problems that already exist in the relationship. That are brought to the surface by an event. Now, if they didn't have the child, they didn't have to decide what to put on the child. Does that mean that they would have never argued with the power difference? I think you can just say that might have happened later on in their life. That would have come about. They might have gone for like 20 years and then thought, okay, well, I've had enough now. And we get those couples, right? I get couples where like they've lived with each other for a long period of time, and suddenly one day it's like, what am I doing?
I mean, those couples, I mean, I work with couples like that as well. Couples that maybe, for probably a host of reasons, maybe modeling in their own childhoods, just won't deal with any conflict at all. They'll just shelve conflict. I mean, that is really, really common, isn't it? Again, it's very, very dependent, on the couple. But how do you tend to work with couples where conflict is just hidden away, really? Because couples do this often, don't they?
Well, you have to kind of work with them on helping. The first thing you have to do is develop communication. Now, frankly, you and I are communicating in this podcast. But if you take communication between a couple, they communicate. I mean, what is communication? Means of communication is letters, emails, and words, spoken word, etc. Texting, like we spoke about earlier, that's means of communication. It's not means of communication that is a problem. They both know English, but it's like it's what they're communicating about and all the emotions attached to that are the problem. So, if one by one you start taking out the barriers to communication and help them take ownership of what they've got. So the I statements versus the you statements are really important.
Yeah.
So when they start making I statements and you help them see that actually both of them are trying to be right and who wants to be wrong, suddenly, I've worked with one couple where that's the only thing I needed to do is to help them see that for one of them to be right, the other one had to be wrong. And could they collaborate on this?
Yeah.
Could they work together on this? Could they compromise on this? Right? And can they solve a problem together versus end up in which solution is better? And if you can do that with a couple, so you have them, it requires, you have to, sometimes one intervention is not enough. You have to do multiple interventions.
Yeah.
And sometimes just with the right couple, making one intervention is enough.
Yeah, it's true.
It can happen that, you do a few sessions and you're done. And there are other couples with them, it can be a long piece of work.
Yeah. That is absolutely true. But there is really something about the zooming out, isn't there, and looking at kind of process and not content.
Yeah, but I'm glad you mentioned that, process and content. But before we do that, it's like, you have to also think about aligning agendas. Sometimes when they come to counseling, their agendas are not aligned.
That's true. Yeah.
Right. So you can spend a long time as a counselor just aligning agendas. Let's say one person's partially checked out of the relationship.
Yeah.
And the other person wants to work on it. Have you got aligned agendas? No, you haven't. One person's not even in. Right? What if one person is lying?
Yeah.
And the other one is there thinking we're trying to be honest over here. And then what? So you haven't got aligned agendas. You can't do your work because the agendas are not aligned. So you have to spend a lot of time aligning agendas. Then you have what you referred to as process versus content. Which we kind of referred to earlier when we said the content is the dishwasher, but the process could be power. So we're just naming it like that, right? That we're not separating the processes. Dishwasher is the content. But what are they really arguing about? The real argument is about the power, which is the process. And sometimes you just have to say it. I don't mince my words. I will just say it in the session. What is your process and what is your content here? So the content can change, but the process won't.
Yeah.
So if, for example, when we talked about the first child is the content, isn't it? The real problem is power again. So if you take away the content, then the problem you just delay the problem till much later on.
Yeah. It's so true what you say. Yeah, because I guess a couple, they've got to be in therapy with aligned agendas. Otherwise, it's just not going to work, is it? Yeah. And often couples do come in with different agendas. That's really, really interesting. And I think very, very true. This is another jump to something else, if that's okay. But I just wondered about your experiences during the pandemic with working with couples. What did you see? Well, it was, it was such a unique situation where couples are effectively locked in their house, aren't they, for months and months? I don't think any couple signed up for that. And I just wonder what you saw, really.
Well, you saw people come together. You also saw where people get on each other's nerves, and you also saw cracking relationships crumble, all of that. But what was really interesting to note during this time was that, when you go to work, you've got 15-minute train ride, and you have the time to get ready for your work before you get there. Let's say 15 minutes, whatever the time. You're leaving home, and the commute gives you time to come into the space where you need to be, read a few emails, get ready for work, think about what you need, read a few papers. And by the time you arrive at work, you're like already in that mode.
Yeah, sure.
Now at work, it's a very cerebral thing. You're completely in your head. There's like less emotion there because it's all process oriented, except for people like us, of course, but that's a different story. But people are in their cognitive head. So when they leave, when they leave work, again, you've got that de-stressor in the train before you get to home, because you start thinking, I'm going to stop and pick up milk or whatever that is. And when you get home, you're now in a space where, you have that, you're at home and life carries on.
Yeah.
But in pandemic, there was no no man's land.
No.
There was no decompression chamber. You went from a cognitive world, you opened the door and you were in your emotional world.
Yeah.
So that because of that, and you saw people's fatigue for that reason alone.
Mm.
Forget the hot housing. That change from cognitive, cerebral stuff to emotional stuff.
Mm.
Just, it was just like people were not getting the time to go from one thing to the other.
Mm.
And that, even I must say, even I didn't see it coming. But when you saw it as a pattern,
Yeah.
I got used to, kind of now saying, can you leave the house, walk around the house, and then come back in? Can you do something that will help you create that space? Just don't open the door and go out there. Just take a few minutes, and that started working.
Yeah.
So, but that was one of the effects that you hadn't seen coming.
Yeah.
But there was other stuff about hot housing and arguments.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I found the same thing. I mean, if the people that, and I would probably be one of these people, that used to kind of moan about having to get the tube and, and public transport. When that was taken away, it's so interesting how many people actually missed it, because that, as you say, was the kind of the space in between work and home. People would maybe kind of de-escalate. They've moved from a cognitive position to a more emotional position. Whereas I guess when people are working from home, there is no separation. And I guess that situation continues really, because lots of people were remote working still. I mean, the whole landscape has changed really, but it's so important to just try and create that space. Particularly, I think it's important for probably all people, but there was also maybe a difference between introverts and extroverts, possibly. This is maybe taking us somewhere else a little bit, but I think, I mean, that I guess I've just opened up something very big, but could you just say a little bit about the difference maybe in terms of what you saw in terms of during the pandemic, how introverts and extroverts maybe managed it differently?
I think it'll take us into a whole discussion about introverts.
Yeah, I know.
Because it's like extroverts is, are you truly an extrovert, or is that a coping strategy?
Yeah.
It's a coping strategy that means a different thing, right? Are you truly an introvert, or are you just hiding? Because if you're doing that then kind of, because depending on the person, if it's a coping strategy and you take the coping strategy away, then what happens to the house of cards?
Yeah.
Then it can crumble and people find it really difficult to cope. If, on the other hand, you're grounded and you're much more within yourself and you take the extrovertism away, then you find alternative ways to be. You can still do video calls, and people developed a new way of working. So you could still be yourself, provided, but a lot of the companies were shut. Salespeople were not working in the same way. Dealerships were shut. So many people were not working in the same way. But even today, like if you're working from home, you said one of the top tips is to actually, again, make sure there's a decompression chamber.
Yeah.
So for introverts or extroverts, it doesn't matter. You need, that you're not changing that part of you. You still need that decompression chamber.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, absolutely true. I mean, could I ask you, just say a little more around how people can get hold of you, the kind of things that people can, because I know you work in so many different areas, the kind of things that you offer in terms of the training. And I mean, if people want to get hold of you, how do they do that? What can they get hold of you in order to, to ask you to assist with?
Well, the simplest way is my website, which is just my name, www.gurpreetsing.uk. And otherwise, it's my mobile number, 07881 400 200. So it's an easy number, and hopefully people can find me should they want. And I'm also a family therapist, but that is new territory. I haven't started, that much work on it. But it's similar to couple working. It's just an added dimension of a third person looking in. So if you've got the couple and you've got the child, then you've got like a three-way dynamic, and that, or more. I mean, it can be siblings, right? So that is an interesting piece of work too, but in time.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds fascinating. Goodness me, the level of complexity. I know we said this when we did our pre-podcast chat. I mean, I'm not a family therapist, but the level of complexity must be great when you're working with a whole family. And in terms of the training, I just could you say a little bit more about the training that you do? If anyone wants to get hold of you to, access any of the training that you offer.
The training is from the same website. You have to
Yeah.
get hold of me, but I do two. You said stress management, and I do that too. But I've actually changed my focus a little bit now to communications, and conflict management is also one of them. And then I also do culturally focused work. So culturally focused relationship training. So actually just focusing, because the culture itself is so vast that you can to spend a whole day doing just that training.
Yeah.
Because it's like it covers so many different. I mean, we only spoke of one, which is time, but there's so many other levels that come in, that people need to think about. And then there's conflict management. Ultimately, we've been talking about arguments, and conflict is at the heart of most of this. And there are some tools that you can actually, pick up that will be really helpful in conflict itself, how to manage conflict. So I can do anything from a 20-minute to a whole day training on any one of these subjects. It depends on what you're really after, to be honest.
Yeah.
Whether it's corporate, whether it's a counseling organization, any one of them.
Yeah. And people can access the information that they need from your website. You do work in so many different areas and offer so much. So I would urge our listeners to check out your website. Time has really flown today. The last question I always ask our guests is, what are your go-to strategies for sustaining your own good mental health?
Number one, get to the park. A day
Yeah.
like this, when the sun's out, you need to get to the park particularly. But I think outdoors is really important.
Yeah.
Whether you're biking, whether you're walking. I mean, I love biking and I love walking, both of them. And I've got a lovely park next to me, which I really enjoy. So walking by the river, by the park, and mindfulness. So a morning, 15-minute, 20 minutes of mindfulness. It doesn't have to be long, but people often do it with podcasts, and I think my suggestion would be to just sit on a park bench, be with yourself for 20 minutes. Don't put anything on, just be with yourself. And if you can just center yourself in those 15, 20 minutes, even if it's 5 minutes, that's still better than 0 minutes. So if you can just spend those few minutes centering yourself and getting ready for the day, and maybe an act of gratefulness during that. Just thinking about what are you grateful for the day.
Yeah.
And I think those are really good grounding ideas.
And I really resonate with those ideas. I mean, the mindfulness in nature, goodness me, so powerful, isn't it? I mean, it's so powerful, just really showing up in a kind of natural environment, and gratitude as well. There's so much research on that, isn't there? I mean, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for what is it's been a really fascinating interview. Before we finish, is there anything you would have liked to have said that I've not given you the opportunity to?
In arguments, I would say that there is one thing to be mindful of. There is the idea that you can either go for the relationship or you can go for the task. For example, what is more important? Is it more important that you figure out which way to load the dishwasher, or is it more important to keep your partner and your relationship happy? The theory is, if somebody loses, somebody will win.
Yeah.
But you both lose or you both win. And you've got to think whether the task is more important or the relationship is more important.
Yeah.
If the focus is relationship, then think about how to do the task with the relationship in mind. And I double wrapping the relationship.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, collaboration rather than power struggle. Okay, we'll finish there. It's been lovely to see you again, Gurpreet, and thank you so much. I'm really chuffed you've come on the show and talked about this really important subject.
No problem. All the best, Mark. Thank you for having me today.
But I'm sure our listeners will agree. What an absolutely fantastic show. I could have talked to Gurpreet for another hour, probably longer. Gurpreet brings so much experience to so many different areas. Really fascinating to hear more in-depth conversation around arguments, and also some of the kind of underpinnings in terms of couple power dynamics and some of the symbols in which arguments can be centered, such as the dishwasher. I mean, process versus content we touched on a little bit. I think it's very important. I think this really aligns with what Gurpreet was saying, that couples in conflict are able just to zoom out a little bit and have a look at the processes that perhaps are getting in the way, like Gurpreet talks about communication, which is often something that can be improved when couples come to therapy, in order to zoom out and have a look at the processes that are not working and change them. Brilliant show. I'm absolutely chuffed to get Gurpreet on the show. I would encourage our listeners to check out his website. Gurpreet also does so much media. There's so many articles and media kind of information that he has contributed to. So I please check out his website. Gurpreet offers training, offers couples therapy, offers one-to-one therapy, and offers an absolute wealth of experience. So I just want to really thank Gurpreet for coming on the show again. It was great to see him, and it really was a fantastic show. Sticking with the theme of relationships, we already have a few guests lined up. I'm not going to say much more about those guests at the moment, but this is Series 5 is turning into another really cracking series. So stay tuned. Next week will be our next episode, and then the following one will be a couple of weeks, I think, after that. Both are going to be great. And as always, as I always say, if you are enjoying the podcast, please do subscribe. It helps us in so many different ways. And also, you know, if you enjoy the podcast, tell your friends. Our numbers are really going up. And I guess the more subscribers we get, the more guests will, you know, consider coming on the show. That being said, you know, every guest I think we've had on the show for all of the 5 series has been brilliant. We have been so lucky with guests. And just as I always say at the end of the episode, look after yourselves, look after each other, and look after the planet. And I'll see you soon on the next episode.